Dust does not settle in space. It just hangs there, waiting. Daniel Reed had learned that a long time ago, and he had stopped minding it. The dead ships around him were full of that hanging dust, little silver flecks of metal and frozen air that drifted past his cockpit window like slow snow. This was the wreck field, a graveyard of a war nobody talked about anymore, and Daniel made his living picking its bones. His ship was old and small and ugly, and he called it the Kettle because it hissed when it warmed up. He had bought it with everything he owned, which had not been much, and he had kept it running with tape, wire, and stubbornness. He worked alone. He liked it that way. When you worked alone, nobody argued with you, and nobody left you. Today the scanners had found something big. A cruiser, or what was left of one, split open down the middle like a cracked seed. Daniel guided the Kettle in close, his hands steady on the controls. He had done this 1,000 times. Find a wreck, cut a hole, take the good parts, sell them at the frontier station, buy food, do it again. It was not a rich life, but it was his. He suited up, checked his seals twice, and floated across the gap between his ship and the dead cruiser. The metal was cold enough to bite through his gloves. Inside, the hallways were dark and tilted, and his headlamp cut a small yellow tunnel through the black. He moved slow. He always moved slow. Fast men died out here. Most of the ship had already been stripped by someone else, years ago maybe. That annoyed him. But near the back, behind a door that had jammed shut, his scanner picked up something strange. Heat. A small, steady bit of warmth, deep in a ship that should have been as cold as the space around it. That did not make sense. Nothing warm should have survived out here. It took him 20 minutes and a cutting torch to get through the door. Behind it was a small room, round, with soft lights that still glowed faintly. In the center, held in a cradle of thin metal arms, sat an egg. Daniel stopped and just looked at it. It was about the size of 2 fists together, and it had a shell like polished stone, deep red with veins of gold running through it. And it was glowing, not brightly. It was more like the last coals of a fire, that dim orange that means the warmth is almost gone. The cradle around it was a machine, he realized, some kind of life support built to keep the egg alive. But the machine was dying. Its lights were failing, one by one, and the warmth was leaking away. He should have left. That was the smart thing. An egg was not metal he could sell. It was not a part he could use. It was a mystery, and mysteries got salvagers killed. He knew all of this. But the glow was fading even as he watched, and something inside him would not let him turn around. Daniel had lost people once, a wife, a child small and quick to laugh, gone in an accident that was nobody's fault and that he had never stopped blaming himself for. After that, he had come out here to the wreck field, to the quiet and the dust, because it was easier to be around dead things than living ones. Living things could break your heart. He had promised himself he would never care about anything that fragile again. And now here he was, staring at a dying glow, feeling that old promise crack. "Ah, hell," he said, and his voice was loud in his helmet. He reached in and pulled the egg free of the failing cradle. It was heavier than it looked, and warmer than it should have been in his cold gloves. He tucked it against his chest like it might spill, and he pushed back through the dark ship, back across the gap, back into the Kettle. Inside his ship, he set the egg down in his own bunk, wrapped in every blanket he owned. The glow was so faint now he could barely see it. He knew, without knowing how he knew, that whatever was inside had only a little time left. Daniel did the only thing he could think of. He ripped open a panel and rerouted power from everything he did not need, the lights, the heaters in the empty parts of the ship, even the backup systems he was supposed to keep for emergencies. He poured all of it into a heating coil, wrapped the coil around the egg, and prayed to nothing in particular that it would be enough. For an hour, nothing happened. The glow stayed weak. Daniel sat beside the bunk with his knees pulled up, watching, too tired to move. He told himself he was a fool, an old fool who was going to grieve over a rock. Then the glow grew stronger. It was slow at first, a deepening of the orange, and then it pulsed once like a heartbeat. Daniel leaned forward. The shell began to shake. A thin crack ran across it with a soft sound like ice breaking on a pond. Then another crack and another. A piece of shell fell away, and a tiny clawed foot pushed out. Daniel did not breathe. The egg broke open, and something small and wet and exhausted tumbled out into the blankets. It had a long neck, a narrow face, and two little wings folded tight against its body. It was the same deep red as the shell, with those same gold veins under its skin. A creature out of an old story. A dragon, if such things were real, and this one was no bigger than a house cat. It lay there, shaking, too weak to lift its head. Its eyes opened, and they found Daniel at once, as if it had been looking for him before it was even born. Then the tiny thing dragged itself across the blanket, wrapped both of its small wings around his forearm, and held on with everything it had. And it would not let go. The problem with a newborn is that it does not come with instructions. Daniel found this out in the first hour, and then again in every hour after. The little creature would not eat the dried meat he offered. It would not drink water from a cup. It cried, a thin high sound that scraped at his ears, and it shivered even when it was warm, and it clung to his arm so tightly that he could not put it down without it crying louder. Daniel had raised a child once, years ago, but that felt like another life, and human Barbies did not have claws or wings or scales the color of hot coals. He tried everything he could think of. In the end, half by accident, he found that the creature would take warm broth if he heated it and let it lap the liquid from his fingers. It was slow and messy, and it took forever, but after a few tries, the little thing drank, and its shivering eased, and it made a small sound that was almost content. Daniel let out a breath he had not known he was holding. Over the next 2 days, he barely slept. The creature needed heat, so he kept it against his body, tucked inside his jacket, where it slept curled over his heart. It needed feeding often, so he fed it often. When he moved around the ship, it rode on his shoulder, its wings gripping the cloth, its narrow head turning to watch everything he did. It was watching him, learning him. When he scratched his chin, it tried to scratch its own. When he hummed to fill the quiet, it made a small buzzing sound back. He started calling it Cinder, because of the glow that lived under its scales, the same low red of a coal that will not go out. By the third day, Daniel knew he could not keep doing this alone. Cinder was getting stronger, but he did not know what it was, what it needed, or what might kill it. He needed help, and there was only one person out here he trusted enough to ask. The frontier station was a rough ring of metal turning slowly in the dark, half repair yard and half market. Daniel had docked there 100 times. He knew which corridors to avoid and which faces meant trouble. He tucked Cinder deep inside his jacket, told it firmly to stay quiet, and to his surprise, it seemed to understand. It went still and silent against him as he walked. Rosa Vega ran the small clinic on the station's lower ring. She was older than Daniel, sharp-eyed, with steady hands, and a habit of telling the truth even when nobody wanted to hear it. They had known each other for years. She had stitched him up more than once and had never once asked him to explain how he got hurt. When he stepped into her clinic and opened his jacket, Rosa went very quiet. Cinder blinked up at her, then made a soft chirp and hid its face against Daniel's chest. "Daniel," Rosa said slowly, "what in the stars is that?" "I was hoping you could tell me," he said. She made him sit. She scanned the little creature with careful hands and careful machines, and the longer she looked, the more her face changed. Wonder, then worry, then something close to fear. "This isn't possible," she said at last, staring at her own screen. "Daniel, I've seen this shape before, only in old records. This is a Vayari." The word meant nothing to him. He said so. Rosa pulled up an image, an old drawing, faded and cracked. It showed a creature much larger than Cinder, red and gold, with great wings spread across a sky. "The Vayari were real a long time ago," she said. "An ancient species, smart, powerful in ways nobody fully understood. The old stories say they could bond to a single person for life and would do anything to protect that bond." She looked up at him. "And they've been extinct for 300 years. The Concord declared it. There are none left. There haven't been for centuries." "Well," Daniel said, looking down at the small warm weight against him, "there's one now." Rosa did not smile. If anything, she looked more afraid. She stood and checked the clinic door, then lowered her voice. "You need to listen to me. The Concord did not just watch the Vayari die. There were rumors, old ones, that they hunted them, that they wanted the Vayari for what they could do, and when they couldn't control them, they wiped them out. Whether that's true or not, one thing is certain. The Concord has always wanted anything Veyari for itself. Bones, eggs, anything. She met his eyes. A living one, Daniel, if the Empire finds out this exists, they will not ask nicely. They will come, and they will take it, and they won't care what they have to break to do it. Daniel felt the small heartbeat against his chest, fast and trusting. He thought about the dying glow in the wreck, about the tiny wings holding onto his arm. Then they'd better not find out, he said. Rosa gave him food that Cinder could eat, a paste of protein and heat that the creature took eagerly from his hand. She gave him medicine and blankets and a long list of things to watch for, and she gave him a warning one more time as he left. Be careful, be invisible. The moment anyone notices, it's over. Daniel thanked her, tucked Cinder away, and walked back through the station toward his ship, keeping his head down. He did not notice the small grey drone hanging near the docking ring, silent, its single lens turning slowly to follow him. He did not see it lock onto the strange heat under his jacket, read the signature no machine had recorded in 300 years, and send that reading out into the dark, straight to the ears of the Empire. By the time he sealed the kettle's hatch, the Concord already knew. The last Veyari was alive, and it had been found. They came 3 days later, and they did not knock. Daniel was still docked at the frontier station, buying supplies, when the whole ring shuddered under his feet. He grabbed a railing and looked out through the nearest window, and his stomach dropped. A ship had come out of nothing and filled the sky. It was a Concord cruiser, long and grey and sharp as a knife, so large it blotted out the stars. Its guns were not firing. It did not need to fire, just being there was enough. Inside his jacket, Cinder went stiff and pressed close, sensing his fear. The station's speakers crackled. A cold, flat voice spoke, in the calm tone of someone reading a form. This station is now under Concord authority. All docking is frozen. All ships are grounded. We are here for a single asset. Cooperate, and this will be brief. An asset, Daniel knew exactly what they meant. He did not run. Running would have marked him at once. Instead, he made himself walk, slow and ordinary, back toward the kettle. But before he reached it, 2 soldiers in grey armor stepped into his path, and behind them came a tall figure that was not human. The alien was thin and grey-skinned, with too many joints in its long limbs and eyes like polished black glass. It wore the sharp uniform of a Concord overseer. When it spoke, its voice was the same flat, cold voice from the speakers. Daniel Reed, it said, not a question. You are in possession of Concord property. You will surrender it now. I don't know what you mean, Daniel said. The overseer tilted its head. Do not waste my time. My name is Talith. I have processed 9,000 cases like yours. They all end the same way. You will give me the Veyari. Before Daniel could answer, another figure came forward, and this one was human. A man in a Concord officer's coat, older, with tired eyes and a hard, careful face. He held up a hand, and to Daniel's surprise, Talith actually paused. Let me, the officer said. Then, to Daniel quieter, come with me a moment, just to talk. His name, he said, was Admiral Grant, and he led Daniel a little apart from the soldiers, into a side corridor where they could speak without the cold grey eyes on them. Listen to me and listen well, Grant said in a low voice. I've read your file, you're a salvager, you're nobody, no offense. This is not a fight you can win. The Concord will take the creature no matter what you do, but I can make it clean. He leaned in. Hand it over quietly. I'll see that you're paid, well paid, more money than you'd make in 10 years. Your record gets cleared. You walk away free and you forget this ever happened. That's the best deal you will ever be offered. Take it. Daniel looked at the man. He could see something in Grant's face that surprised him. The Admiral did not like this. He was offering the deal because he wanted Daniel to survive. It's not an it, Daniel said. It's a child. You want me to sell a child. Grant's jaw tightened. I want you to live. You said the Concord let them all die, Daniel said, thinking of Rosa's words. You let a whole people vanish. And now that there's one left, one little living thing that trusts me, you want to take it and turn it into a weapon. And you call it property. He shook his head. No, I found it dying and I brought it back. It's mine to protect now. I'm not selling it to the people who killed its family." Grant closed his eyes for a moment, as if he had known this would be the answer and had hoped it would not be. "Then I can't help you," he said quietly, "and you have no idea what you've just chosen." The talking was over. Talith grew tired of waiting. The overseer froze Daniel's accounts with a word, cancelling his salvage license, marking his ship, cutting off every way he had of buying food or fuel. Then it turned to the station master and made a threat so calm it was worse than shouting. Surrender the Vayari, or the station's air and water would be cut until it was surrendered. Innocent people, hundreds of them, all held over one small creature. Daniel felt the walls closing in. He could not fight soldiers, he could not outrun a cruiser, and he would not let hundreds of people suffer for him. But then Cinder moved. The little creature had felt everything, the fear, the anger, the cold voices circling its bonded human like wolves, and something in it broke open. It gave a high, sharp cry, pushed free of Daniel's jacket, and spread its tiny wings wide. The gold veins under its scales flared bright, brighter than Daniel had ever seen, until the whole corridor was washed in red-gold light. Then it released a pulse. It was not fire and it was not sound. It was a wave of raw energy, silent and huge, and it rolled out from the little body in every direction. Every screen in the corridor went black. The soldiers' armor locked up and dropped them to their knees. And through the window, Daniel watched the great grey cruiser flicker, its lights dying in a spreading wave as its systems shorted out one after another. The Empire's worst fear stood proven in a single moment. The Vayari were not just relics, they were power itself, and this one was awake. Talith's black eyes fixed on the glowing creature with something new in them, not anger, hunger. Cinder swayed, exhausted by what it had done, and tumbled back into Daniel's arms. Daniel did not wait for the soldiers to rise. He ran. He ran through the dead corridors, past frozen doors, into the kettle, and slammed the hatch. Emergency power still flickered in his ship where the pulse had spared it. He tore the docking clamps loose, fired every engine he had, and threw the little salvage ship out into the dark before the cruiser could wake. Behind him, the Empire came back to life, furious now, and began to give chase. A wreck field is the worst place in the galaxy to fly, and that was exactly why Daniel flew into one. The kettle plunged into the graveyard of broken ships with its engines screaming. All around, dead hulls turned slowly in the black, jagged and huge, close enough to scrape the paint off a careless pilot. A Concorde cruiser was fast and strong and armed, but it was also big, and big things did not do well among the wrecks. Daniel was small, and he had spent his whole life here. He knew this graveyard the way other men knew the streets of their home city. He killed his running lights. He cut his engines to a low whisper, and he slipped the kettle into the shadow of a shattered warship, letting the wreck hide his heat and his shape. The cruiser came in behind him, careful and slow, its searchlights sweeping the debris. Daniel held his breath and did not move. Cinder curled in his lap. Understood somehow that stillness meant safety. It made no sound. Its glow dimmed until it was almost dark. For an hour they played this game. The cruiser searched. Daniel hid, drifting from wreck to wreck, using the metal ghosts to break the enemy's sensors. Whenever a searchlight swung near, he pushed the kettle into a new shadow and waited. Twice, the cruiser passed so close that Daniel could read the markings on its hull. Twice, it moved on. At last, frustrated, the great ship pulled back to search a different sector. Daniel let out a long, shaking breath and set a course, quiet and low, toward the far edge of the field. He did not know where to go. His accounts were frozen. His name was marked. Every station in Concorde space would arrest him on sight. He was running with no fuel to spare, no money, and a creature the whole Empire wanted. The answer came from Rosa. A message reached him 3 days later, bounced through a dozen hidden relays that only a station medic would know how to use. It was short and careful, in case anyone was listening. It did not use his name. It only gave a set of numbers, coordinates, and 3 words. Go here, trust. Daniel did not know it then, but Rosa had paid for that message. The Concorde had detained her, questioned her for hours about the salvager and the creature. She had told them nothing. She had let them think she knew nothing. And the moment they let her go, She had risked everything to send him one last lifeline. She had aimed him at a free port, a hidden place beyond the reach of the Empire's law, where a marked man might disappear. The journey there took a week, and it was the strangest week of Daniel's life. Cinder was growing fast. In 7 days, the little creature that had fit inside his jacket grew to the size of a large dog, its wings long enough now to stretch across the whole cabin. Its mind grew too. It learned to bring Daniel tools when he worked. It learned to warn him with a low growl when the sensors picked up a distant ship. It learned his moods, and when he sat awake at the controls, tired and afraid, it would climb up beside him and wrap those growing wings around his shoulders, holding him the way it had held his arm on the day it was born. And something in Daniel, something that had been frozen for years, began to thaw. He had come to the rec field to be alone with dead things because living things could break your heart. He had lost a family once and had promised himself never again. But here, in the quiet, running for both their lives, he understood that the promise was already broken. This strange red creature had made a family out of the two of them, and it had done it without asking, simply by refusing to let go. "You didn't give me much choice, you know," he told it one night, scratching the ridge above its eyes. Cinder rumbled deep in its chest, a sound like a purr and thunder mixed together, and pressed its warm head against his hand. Far away on the flagship, Admiral Grant watched the reports come in, and he began to doubt. Grant had seen the recording from the station 100 times, not the pulse. Everyone watched the pulse. He watched what came after. He watched the exhausted creature fall back into the salvager's arms, and he watched the man catch it without a second's thought, shielding it with his own body. That was not a man holding a weapon. That was not property. Grant had spent 30 years serving the Concorde, telling himself its orders were reasons. Now, for the first time, he was not sure. But the Empire does not stop for one officer's doubt. Daniel reached the free port on the 7th day. It was a rough, cheerful place, a hidden ring built into a hollow asteroid, full of smugglers and runaways and people the law had forgotten. For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt his shoulders come down. Nobody here would sell him out. Here, he thought, they might finally be safe. He was wrong. The Concorde had followed Rosa's message, not by breaking it, but by patience. They had watched every relay, traced every bounce, and let Daniel lead them to the one place he thought was safe. Taylor had learned that a hunted thing runs toward what it loves, and so the overseer had simply waited to see what Daniel loved. The cruiser arrived at the free port an hour after Daniel did. This time Taylor did not threaten the walls, it threatened the people. It aimed its guns at the crowded, defenseless ring, thousands of runaways and children and old smugglers, and it made Daniel a simple offer over the open channel. Surrender the Vayari and the Freeport lives, refuse, and it dies with everyone in it. Daniel stood at the kettle's hatch with Cinder pressed against his side, and he felt the whole weight of it crush down on him. He could run again, but if he ran, thousands would die for him. He looked into Cinder's golden eyes, and the creature looked back, and he swore it understood. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Then Daniel Reed walked out of his ship, raised his empty hands, and gave himself up to save them all. They took him in chains, and they put Cinder in a cage. A cage cannot hold a bond. The Concorde did not understand this yet, but they were about to learn it the hard way. They brought Cinder aboard the flagship and locked it in a chamber built to hold a monster. The walls were thick. The bars were charged. A ring of scientists in white surrounded the cage, machines humming, screens glowing, all of them eager to study the impossible creature that no living person had ever seen. Their orders from Taylor were clear. Break the bond. Cut the tie between the beast and the salvager, and turn the Vayari into a weapon that obeys the Concorde and nothing else. They tried everything they knew. They tried sound and light and cold. They tried commands and rewards. They tried machines that were supposed to reach into a creature's mind and rewrite it, and nothing worked. Cinder would not eat. It would not obey. It sat in the center of its cage with its wings wrapped tight around itself, and it stared at the door, waiting. When the scientists came too close, the gold veins under its scales began to glow, and the whole ship's power would flicker and dim, a warning so clear that even the bravest of them backed away. It was not a wild animal lashing out. It was a child refusing, with all its strength, to become the thing they wanted it to be. 2 decks below, Daniel sat in a cell of his own. He could feel it when Cinder was afraid. He did not know how, but he could. A cold weight would settle in his chest, and he would press his hand to the wall and whisper, "I'm here, hold on, I'm here." And somehow, far above him, the creature grew calmer whenever he did. Talith watched the failures pile up with growing anger. The Overseer had promised the Concorde a weapon, and instead it had a beast that starved itself and shorted out the ship. Finally, Talith reached the only conclusion its cold mind could reach. The bond was the problem, and the bond had 2 ends. "The creature will not turn while the human lives," Talith said. "The human is a distraction. Remove the distraction, and the beast will have nothing left to cling to. It will break, and then it will obey." The Overseer turned its black eyes on Admiral Grant. "You will carry out the order. Execute the salvager." Grant did not move. He stood on the bridge of the flagship, the order hanging in the air, and 30 years of service pressed down on him. He had followed the Concorde his whole life. He had told himself its commands were always for the greater good. And now he was being told to kill an unarmed man for the crime of loving something the Empire wanted to own. He thought about the recording, the man catching the falling creature, the wings wrapped around a tired human's shoulders. He thought about a whole species that the Concorde had let die, and about the one small life that had trusted a stranger enough to be born. "No," Grant said. The bridge went silent. "I've served the Concorde for 30 years, he went on, and his voice did not shake. "I told myself we protected people, but this isn't protection, this is theft, and now it's murder. That creature isn't refusing to be a weapon because it's stubborn. It's refusing because it was never a weapon in the first place. It's a child, and it loves one man, and that love is the whole of what the Vayari are. You cannot cut it out, you can only kill it, and I won't." Talith's grey face twisted. "Then you are a traitor." "Then I'm a traitor," Grant said, and he turned and walked off the bridge, past the stunned soldiers, before anyone thought to stop him. He went straight to the cells. Daniel looked up as the door opened, expecting soldiers. Instead, he saw the tired-eyed Admiral, alone, unlocking his chains with his own hands. "Why?" Daniel asked. "Because I finally figured out which side I'm on," Grant said. "Now get up, we don't have long. And that thing upstairs is going to bring this ship down around us if we don't reach it fast." They moved through the ship together, Grant using his rank to open doors that should have stayed shut, until they reached the great chamber where Cinder was caged. The moment Daniel stepped through the doorway, the creature's head snapped up. For a long second they only looked at each other, the man and the dragon, across a room full of humming machines. Then Cinder cried out, a sound of pure joy, and everything changed. The gold veins under its scales blazed to life, not in fear this time, but in purpose. The bars of the cage, charged and thick, meant nothing. The creature's power reached out and unmade them, and Cinder burst free and crossed the room in a single leap, wrapping its long wings around Daniel, knocking him back against the wall, holding him the way it had held his arm on the day it was born. Daniel laughed, half a sob, and held on just as hard. "I've got you," he said into its neck. "I've got you, I'm not letting go either." And in that moment, something in Cinder finished waking up. All the power the scientists had feared, all the raw energy that had shorted out cruisers and flickered flagships, settled into place behind a single clear thought. Protect him. Not the wild panic of a newborn now, but the focused will of something that finally knew its own strength and what it was for. The lights of the flagship dimmed, then died deck by deck, as Cinder took hold of the ship itself. Alarms began to wail and then fell silent, doors sealed. Soldiers rushing toward the chamber found their weapons dead in their hands. Talith, on the darkened bridge, felt the great ship stop, answering its commands one system at a time, and for the first time, the Overseer understood true fear. "Time to go," Grant said, staring at the display in something like awe. Daniel pulled back, met Cinder's golden eyes, and nodded. Together, the three of them turned toward the way out, into a ship that no longer belonged to the empire that built it. There is a moment in every empire's life when it meets something it cannot buy, cannot break, and cannot own. For the Concorde, that moment came in the dark heart of its own flagship, and it wore the shape of a red dragon with its wings around a tired man. The escape was not a wild run. It did not need to be. Cinder held the ship in its grip and the ship obeyed. Doors opened before Daniel and Grant reached them. Corridors that should have been full of soldiers stood empty, the men inside locked behind sealed hatches, unharmed but helpless. Cinder could have crushed them. It chose not to. Every soldier it passed, it left alive. That choice mattered, and Daniel understood why. A weapon kills because it is told to. Cinder was showing the whole ship, and itself, that it was something else. They reached the great docking bay, where the kettle sat waiting beside 100 grey warships. And there, at last, Talith was waiting too. The overseer stood in their path, flanked by the few soldiers who had reached the bay before the doors sealed. Its black eyes were fixed not on Daniel, but on Cinder. "You cannot take it," Talith said, and its flat voice had cracked at the edges. "The Vayari belongs to the Concorde. It is our property. It has always been our property. 300 years we have waited for one to appear, and I will not lose it to a scavenger." Daniel stepped forward, and he was not afraid anymore. "You keep saying that word," he said. "Property. You had 300 years. You had a whole living people, a whole species, and you didn't protect them. You hunted them until there was nothing left but a single dying egg in a wreck that everyone else had already picked clean. That's what your empire does. It takes and it owns and it kills what it can't control." He put his hand on Cinder's warm neck. "I found this one dying and I gave it warmth, that's all. I didn't order it to love me. It just did, because I chose to keep it alive instead of walking away. That's the difference between you and me. You wanted to own it. I just wanted it to live." Talith's face twisted. "It is a weapon." "It's a child," Daniel said, "and you can't have it." For a moment it seemed Talith would order its soldiers forward anyway, but Cinder simply looked at the overseer and let the gold light rise under its scales, and the last few lights in the great bay flickered as a reminder of what it could do if it ever chose to stop being gentle. The soldiers lowered their weapons. Even Talith, at last, stood still. Grant stepped up beside Daniel then, and he was holding a small recording device. "I've served the Concorde for 30 years, the Admiral said, loud enough for the whole bay to hear, "and I have every order Talith gave, the threats against the station, the threat against the free port, thousands of civilians used as hostages over one creature, the order to kill an unarmed man. It's all here, and I'm going to make sure every world on the frontier sees it." He looked at Talith. "You wanted a weapon. You just handed the frontier a reason to hate you. Let them go, or the whole quadrant learns exactly what the Concorde did today. The Empire is powerful, but it is not stupid." Talith understood, in that cold and calculating mind, that a war fought to steal a child, a war exposed to every watching world, was a war the Concorde could not win, not without becoming the villain of a story told on 1,000 planets. The cost had become greater than the prize. The overseer stepped aside. Daniel, Grant, and Cinder boarded the kettle and flew out of the flagship's dark bay into open stars, and no one fired a shot. The recording spread the way fire spreads through dry grass. Grant made sure of it, sending it to every free relay, every frontier port, every world that had ever chafed under Concorde rule. People saw the Empire threaten the helpless over a single small life, and they were furious. Pressure built and built until the Concorde, to save its own face, was forced to do the last thing Talith ever wanted. It publicly gave up its claim. The last Vayari, it announced, was free. Daniel took Cinder home, if a wreck field and a frontier station could be called home. Rosa was waiting, released and safe, and she wept when she saw them both alive. Grant, with nowhere left to go and no wish to go back, stayed too. A salvager, a medic, a runaway admiral, and a dragon. It was a strange little family, cobbled together out of broken pieces, exactly the kind of thing Daniel had spent his whole life salvaging from the dark. The word spread quietly after that. Where there was one Vayari, there might be more. More dying eggs in more forgotten wrecks, waiting for someone to choose warmth over profit. Daniel found himself thinking about that a great deal, and about what it might mean to go looking, not to sell, but to save. But that was for later. On a quiet night not long after, Daniel sat at the controls of the kettle, watching the slow snow of dust drift past his window, the same view he had watched alone for so many years. Only he was not alone now. Cinder had grown large, far too large to fit inside a jacket, its head as big as his chest, its wings able to fold over the whole cockpit. It climbed up beside him the way it always did, settled its warm weight against his side, and wrapped those great wings around him. It was the exact same thing it had done as a newborn, on the day it hatched, when it had been small enough to hold in two hands and had gripped his arm and refused to let go. An entire empire had come for them. It had frozen his accounts, chased him through the dark, caged the creature, chained the man, and ordered them torn apart in 100 different ways. And none of it had been enough. Daniel closed his eyes, one hand resting on the warm scales, and let himself rest for the first time in a long time. Some bonds are made of duty, and those can be broken. Some are made of fear, and those never last. But a bond made of a single choice, to keep something alive when it would have been easier to look away, is a different thing entirely. That kind, no empire in all the stars can ever tear apart.